So maybe you've taken part in this scene, and I'm going to guess if you haven't taken part in it, you've at least seen it. It's where a dog gets out from the house or the gate, and then whether it's the adult or the kid goes and runs after the dog, and the dog thinks, this is a great game, so I'll run faster. And so the person runs faster, and then the dog runs faster, and then the person runs faster, and then the person wears out of breath, and the dog's still running around thinking, wow, keep going, keep running, person, it's a great game. Anybody else had that experience? I've been guilty of that. And sometimes you just stop, and the dog finally says, oh, okay, game's over, I'll come back. I think sometimes the reason that we don't hear God anymore is we're so busy running that, we run and run and run, and we think it's a great game, and God's sitting there waiting for us to stop running. God's sitting there waiting for us to stop doing. God's sitting there waiting for us to be present and to take the time and the space to be there. Let's turn it on. We talk about our marks of discipleship at the end of each service, and the first one being worshiping weekly. And I think there are all kinds of things that go on in the midst of our world, and I'm not here to condemn all the things that are a part of our world. That's not who I am. That's not what I believe. But I think there are a lot of things that distract us, and they're good things. Whether it is family or sports or just taking time to sleep in a little bit or all these other things are not bad things. But we're often distracted by the kind of tyranny of the important from that which is essential, from that which is at the center of our lives. And as followers of Jesus, worshiping is at the center of what we're supposed to be about, who we're supposed to be about, taking time to be in that place where God can be present with us, where we can slow down. And I don't know about anybody else, sometimes it takes my mind a little bit of time to even slow down once I stop. Anybody had that time where you go on vacation and you're still thinking about work for about the first 5 or 6 days of vacation? By the time you finally get done thinking about work, it's time to go back home. We need to be at this place, I think, sometimes where we can stop, where we can slow down, where we can be in that place. And we heard, for example, in Genesis, where Abraham sees the Lord approaching. And, ultimately, it's in the heat of the day, and Abraham rushes out and says, okay, wait here. And if you just wait just a little bit, you can be refreshed and you can go on. Now, Abraham's idea of waiting just a little bit and our idea of waiting just a little bit are two different things. Let me warn you. So he runs into Sarah and it says, take 3 measures of flour and make cakes out of it. Now, a measure of flour is about 10 pounds. So this is a lot of cakes being made. And then he goes and this is not where you can go to Kroger and pick up the side of beef, and even if you're picking up a side of beef, that's talking about taking all day to cook it. No, he goes, he gets the calf, he prepares the calf, he has a servant go and start to prepare it, and then he goes and starts doing all these things. So by the time he finally brings the meal out to the Lord who's waiting on him, it's been an entire day. The entire day is rotated around this time to stop. And then finally he comes and he serves God, and he sits there and he listens. And God waits for Abraham. God waits for Sarah. God waits to the point where they're done with all the other stuff so that God can speak to them. Those of you who've been around very long have probably had a chance to eat at some point where I prepared food. And I enjoy doing that. I enjoy preparing a meal. I enjoy sitting down around a meal, but I also know that in that comparison between Mary and Martha, I'm a lot more Martha. I'm the person who will run around, and I've had times where I've had people over to my house and I've tried to prepare a meal for them, and I'm so busy kind of getting everything out and getting everything to everybody that by the time I finally sit down, everybody else is eating and the conversation is kind of dying down. It's like, I missed it. I missed it. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy creating that space and that time for people to have that conversation, but there's also that joy of being there in the midst of that time where the conversation goes back and forth. And I'm more of a listener than I am a talker a lot of times, which is probably ironic since I'm up here talking to you every week. But I love to be able to come and sit down and just listen and hear whatever everybody else has to say and be a part of that. Certainly contribute when it's appropriate, but that's valuable. I mean, I think one of the most important things, I've told people this before, I think the most important piece of what I do, one of the greatest gifts of what I get to do, is I get to hear people's stories. I get to hear what's going on in their life. I get to hear, the events that have shaped them, the events that they've struggled with, the things that are a part of that. And I think sometimes there are things that take me away from that very thing. So if you look at my desk on a typical week, this is my desk when it's clean. But one of the things you'll notice about it is I have 3 different planning systems on my desk. So I have one for planning worship, one for planning the rest of the week, and then one is a desk calendar just to kind of keep myself straight. And that's not even counting my computer, which has everything on it too. And I think sometimes if I were to open up my schedule to a random week, there would be weeks where it's like, oh, what does Pastor Neil do this week? And there are other weeks where it's like, how did Pastor Neil get anything done this week? Because it's so filled with different various things. And, I have to remind myself sometimes to take a step back, to listen, to be attentive to that which is the most important thing. To be present in those times in that space, and to give, whether it's preparing for this time where we come together to worship, or whether it's that time and spending in that one-on-one conversation with somebody. And again, I've always, even though I can say, here's all these things that I plan out, I've always tried to be, never too busy for a person when they want to have a conversation. Never too busy for a person when they, when they're in that place where they need to be heard and be present. So you have Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha have been going, Martha's been running around, and I get this, running around trying to make everything perfect for that time when Jesus is going to be there. Just probably like Abraham did, and Sarah did, and the servant did in Abraham's time. But Mary's trying, we've got this one time where Jesus is going to be here. I want to impress Jesus. And Jesus isn't impressed by our running around. Jesus isn't impressed by all the different things or what we can put on the table or the way that everything looks. Jesus wants us to be present. Jesus wants us to be there in that moment. And Mary gets it. She sits at Jesus' feet and she listens. And Mary's so busy moving around and doing all these things that she misses that part. Now, there's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with being active, there's nothing wrong with wanting to present a nice meal, but I think everything has its time and its place. And there's a time to prepare. And there's a time to listen. So I warned you there is a little change coming in worship today. Nothing to worry about. So one of the things that sometimes happens in worship is we do the same thing over and over again, and you don't listen to what you're doing. So, for example, in this service, one of the things that we do every week is the Apostles' Creed, which is, you could probably say it without even looking at it right now. So anybody else guilty of looking ahead? I do this. So in the New Testament, there are 2 confessions of faith. There's one in Philippians and there's one in Colossians. Philippians 2 and Colossians 1. We happen to read one today. And I thought, part of worship is being present, is being able to listen, is being able to be at that place and to focus in on who we are worshiping and what it means. And so as we heard in Colossians, as Paul is writing to this church in Colossae, he shares with them who Jesus is and what he means. So, as he writes, Christ Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. You know, the one who we come to meet in Jesus is the one who we meet in the creation. That somehow the one who we meet in Jesus is that same God. That we come here and we worship him, and this is where we come to know about what God is like. Jesus himself was before all things, and all things in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, so that he might have the first place in everything. For in him the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace through the blood of his cross. You know, this same God came down to be a part of our world, came down to be present with us. And sometimes, I'm sure there were lots of people in his own time who were so busy running around that they missed what was really going on. And there are lots of people in our time who are so busy running around that they miss what's really going on. But God comes down to be in our midst. And, you know, so whether, like Abraham and Sarah, we ask God to stop and stay for a while, and we want to prepare a banquet, or we're like Mary and Martha and Jesus comes and is a part of our house, or whether it's we here at this time when we come together and we worship and we trust that God is somehow present here, so we linger a while and we listen and we lift up our prayers and we sing songs of praise. And somehow in the midst of this, I do trust that God meets us. So one of the things I like about this particular one in Colossians is you have the first part where it's about this is who Jesus is, this is what Jesus is doing. And then you have a second piece, and this is what it means. And you who were once estranged and hostile to God or hostile in mind doing evil deeds, Christ is now reconciled in his fleshly body through death, so as to present you holy and blameless and irreproachable before him, provided that you continue securely established and steadfast in the faith, without shifting from the hope promised by the gospel that you have heard, which has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven. You know, there may have that we may not have ever experienced that point, but again, like that dog that was running away from its owner, you know, even when we were distant from God, God was faithful to us. God came down to us. God made peace with us. God welcomed us back home. God made us who we are. It's not that we did anything to earn that. That's what grace is all about. You who once were estranged or hostile in mind, you've now been reconciled. You've now been made holy. And because of that, now we too are those who are servants of this gospel. And so in just a minute, instead of the Apostles' Creed, we're going to read this. And again, on that last line, instead of I, Paul, have now become a servant of the gospel, I'm going to have you state your own name. I think we all have, in our own ways, in our own gifts, and the own things that we have to bring, we have become servants of this gospel. We have become servants of this God who we've met in Jesus Christ. And I know that, you know, again, one of the things that goes on in the midst of our world is sometimes we wear our busyness like a badge of honor. I don't know about anybody else. How many people have answered the question, how are you doing today? Well, I'm busy. I'm guilty of that. I'm busy. As if that's the best thing in the world. And I think we've forgotten that God has commanded us, you know, and one of the 10 Commandments is taking a day of rest. Taking that time to not be busy. Taking that time so that we can be in that space where God can hear us. You know, and I think sometimes we say, well, I don't have time. I don't have time for worship. I don't have time for prayer. I don't have time for all these things that would draw me closer to God. And again, that's when we're busy running like that dog and we think it's a game. And God's waiting for us. God's waiting for us to welcome us home. We are those, you know, not because we're special, but because we've been gifted. You know, we are the ones who have heard this gospel proclaimed to us. We are the ones who know about this God who loves us more than anything else. And so we come together and we worship and we praise and we sing songs. And we give thanks. And perhaps more important than anything, we're present in this space, in this time, where we can listen to what God might have to say to us this day. Thanks be to God. Amen.